It will not lead to a reduction in carbon emissions in developing countries for another 10 to 15 years, including places like China.
Well, that comment just aged like milk, didn't it? He's right that signing papers don't do anything, but actions do, like implementing a carbon tax. You know, Ben, I too love capitalism. So I'm sure that you'll agree with me that America should implement a nationwide $40 per ton carbon tax just as a start. Agree with Ben Shapiro or not, he's generally considered a reasonable conservative to many people. This video will show his subversion on the climate change discussion for a topic he's clearly read a great deal about, but has decided to play politics rather than be honest with the details.
My question is about climate change. So if I remember correctly, I heard you once say in a video that you do believe that human activity does have some sort of effect on the climate.
Yep.
So one, I would just like you to explain a little bit of your understanding of climate change.
Sure.
And another question is, are there any government policies that you would support in terms to mitigate carbon emissions? Yeah.
Okay, so so my perspective on climate change is, number one, I'm not a climatologist, but accepting the IPCC reports, you have to take into account the fact that modeling has been wrong for 20 to 30 years. It's always been overestimating the amount of climate change that's actually taken place.
So no, Ben, modeling has actually been pretty accurate, and we've only been getting better at it. Here's a study showing the modeling accuracy for the last few decades. Generally, it's pretty good, and this is where we start to see the subversion.
But virtually every reputable scientist, including folks who are called skeptics, believe that the climate is warming. There's an argument about as to how much, and that over 50% of that warming is probably attributable to human activity. Now, that
50%, Ben? Where's that number coming from? Who are these climate scientists that are arguing about this? I'm honestly curious where this 50% number comes from. I tried to track it down. I have no idea what he's talking about. The closest thing I've seen is a poll showing 50% of Americans believe in climate change, but that's not really irrelevant because we care about what's true, not what people think is true. If anybody knows what he's talking about, please send me a link because for all intents and purposes, it's 100%. You might be able to marginally say 98, 99% when we're looking at volcanoes' contribution, but for all practical purposes, anthropogenic climate change is 100% human caused.
That raises other questions, which is, okay, so let's say the Earth is warming. What kind of damage is that actually going to do? And this is a serious question, right? Let's say that the Earth is warming and we're causing it. Does that mean that it's the day after tomorrow and massive floods in New York and Dennis Quaid running around with Jake Gyllenhaal trying to avoid the freeze? No, it doesn't, right? It means that over the course of the next 100 years that the water level is going to rise a rather predictable number of inches or feet, and then humans will migrate based on those weather patterns as humans have done since human beings became human beings and started walking on 2 feet. So, you know, I'm a little...
Ben, most people in the world live near water, so just moving alone would incur huge costs related to infrastructure and having to rebuild or move large houses.
A little more sanguine about the possibility of long-term climate change than a lot of the catastrophists who seem to assume that there's going to be tremendous damage done. All the talk, for example, about the storms are becoming that more severe and they're doing that much more damage. The statistics really don't back that up. What they really back up is that we're just building more stuff in the path of hurricanes, that we're building more expensive stuff in the path of hurricanes. And so when the storms break that stuff, then it's more expensive for us to fix that stuff.
Yeah, Ben, because we mostly live near water. Nevertheless, more expensive stuff means more economic damage, hence why insurance companies have been taking climate change into account since at least the 1970s. While I was researching for this video, another channel called All About Climate actually did a video about Ben's claims here, so I'll send you a link to that. I think I can add a little bit more context around the economics of climate change because he goes into a little bit more of the technicality of it, but he debunks many of the claims that Ben makes here, specifically regarding the hurricanes.
Because the number of hurricanes actually hasn't changed markedly over time. And when folks say the intensity of hurricanes has changed, what they really mean is that the amount of cost associated with the hurricane has changed. As far as what should be done about that, well, the biggest problem that you have is a serious collective action problem. Let's assume that you really think that there's a huge problem. You still have to decide whether you believe, let's put it this way, what level of climate change requires what level of cutbacks in terms of the global economy. So there's a fellow whose name escapes me right now who just won the Nobel Prize in Economics who legitimately made his entire career out of studying the economics of climate change. When does he think that...
Certainly he has to be talking about the climate modeler, William Nordhaus. He's been advocating for a price on carbon for decades. Using Nordhaus's models, that's approximately 40 USD per ton. I'm sure Ben is going to say that the solution is then carbon taxing, since he's appealing to this authority, correct?
Intervention economically is called for. He says that until he believes that over the next century there's 3.5 degrees centigrade of climate change, that intervention actually would be counterproductive. It would cost more to intervene than it would to actually allow the damage to take place and just cope with it. Because the
What the fuck? Nordhaus definitely did not say that. Rather, he looked at the optimal economic case for damage versus abatement and what carbon taxes should be implemented within that time frame. I disagree strongly with Nordhaus's assessment, but if he's going to appeal to this authority, he at least needs to be honest with what that authority is providing him. Nordhaus has always been pro-carbon tax, and Nordhaus only used that 3.5 degree optimal case as 3.5 degrees should be the temperature that we target as we weigh the economic costs and systems. But a carbon tax has always underpinned that. Some fun facts about Nordhaus, though. He did win the Nobel Prize for climate modeling. But there's a very specific caveat to this, that his prize was for his contribution to the methodology and not for the conclusions that he came to. As when you make different assumptions than him, using the same models, you get dramatically different results. Nordhaus assumed that because 90% of jobs were indoors, they'd be unaffected by climate change. Other economists, contemporaries that agree with Nordhaus have said things as stupid as, we'll just live indoors like the Saudis. I'll explore the economics of climate change modeling in future videos. It's going to take me a while to congregate all that information, and Nordhaus is going to underpin a lot of that. But for now, just know that Nordhaus is generally the low end of the damage climate modeling, and meta-analyses on these subjects show much higher results. This is why fuckheads like Bjorn Lomborg are accused of cherry picking. Because if you want to downplay climate change, you'll pick the one guy that agrees with you and not the vast array of economic modeling that shows a different result and basically destroys the entire conservative premise on not doing anything.
Economy is going to continue to grow over time. So I don't see any reason why I think that I would know better than he does. It's also a basic fact that the only countries that have really been abiding by any of
So the economy will grow. Good thing studies are showing that carbon taxes and green energy are generally good for the economy, either maintaining economic prosperity or increasing it. Though, in all fairness, Ben's video is a little older, and the data showing renewables as cheaper technology is a little bit more recent. Oh wait, he says this stuff on Lex Friedman's podcast about a year ago.
I would say the truth is, for years and years, I've believed that climate change was a reality and that anthropogenic climate change is a reality. I don't argue with the IPCC estimates. I know climatologists at places like MIT or Caltech, and they know this stuff better than I do. So, the notion that climate change is just not happening or that human beings have not contributed to climate change, I find doubtful. The question is to what extent human beings are contributing to climate change. Is it 50%? Is it 70%? Is it 90%? I think there's a little bit more play in the joints there, so it's not totally clear. And the reality is that we're going to have to accept that at least 1.5 degrees Celsius of climate change is baked into the cake by the end of the century. Again, not me talking, William Nordhaus, the economist, who just won the Nobel Prize in this stuff talking. What you'll see is a gradual change of living. People will move away from areas that are inundated on the coast. You'll see people building seawalls. You'll see people adapting new technologies to suck carbon out of the air. You will see geoengineering. Right? This is the sort of stuff that we should be focused on. And the sort of bizarre focus on, what if we just keep tossing hundreds of billions of dollars at the same three technologies over and over in the hopes that if we subsidize it, this will magically make it more efficient? I've seen no evidence whatsoever that that is going to be the way that we get ourselves out of this. Necessity being the mother of invention. I think human beings will adapt because we have adapted and we will continue to adapt.
So to the degree we invest in the threat of this, it should be into the policies that help with the adaptation versus the mitigation.
Right, seawalls, geoengineering, developing technologies that carbon out of the air.
No evidence? Guess you haven't looked very hard. Renewables are taking over across Europe. Adaptation is great. We're going to need to do it, but it comes with a cost. I, for one, prefer lower power costs. I have no idea why Ben might not be in favor of cheap renewable energy. Nope, no idea at all.
Attempts to reduce climate change have been extraordinarily developed countries. Developing countries have no interest in sacrificing their own people at the altar of climate change. And the number one reducer in emissions over the past year was actually the United States. I mean, the United States pulls out of the Paris Accords.
So China and India are actually leading the charge on renewables now, since they're cheaper and they help with energy independence. I won't knock them for that, since we're looking at a little bit more recent data now than when this video was made.
What does solve climate change is technological progress. And technological progress has led to a reduction in carbon emissions in the United States. It will not lead to a reduction in carbon emissions in developing countries for another 10 to 15 years, including places like China.
Well, that comment just aged like milk, didn't it? He's right that signing papers don't do anything, but actions do, like implementing a carbon tax. Technology is great. Glad we invented solar and wind because it's cheaper than our existing fossil fuel fleet. The conservative talking points are starting to fall through the cracks. It's going to become harder and harder to deny all of this information.
So it's a complex issue, and all the folks who are basically like, let's just kill capitalism. Good luck with that.
You know, Ben, I too love capitalism. So I'm sure that you'll agree with me that America should implement a nationwide $40 per ton carbon tax just as a start. Anyway, thank you for watching. As always, all of the references will be in the description, and let me know down below if there's anything else you'd like me to cover.